My wife revealed. She had been cheating and wanted a divorce, shattering our 8-year marriage. Now, I'm trying to start over, while facing the challenge of learning to trust again. It's early September now, but this story goes back to Mother's Day earlier this year. To give you the right context, I need to take you back about 2.5 years. My wife, Emily, 27, and I, 26, were having a tough time in our marriage. We had just relocated across the country to a new city, one known for its high crime rates. Coming from a small town in the Midwest, I had a hard time adjusting, especially when it came to my mental health. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety. This, of course, put additional strain on our marriage, not to mention the stress Emily was facing as a graduate student working on her PhD. As part of her program, she had to spend 3.5 months in a remote area somewhere on the planet. I'm keeping it vague. During that time, our communication was limited to just one Zoom call a week. It was a real challenge for me. We had been inseparable since I was 18, back when I was a college freshman. Adding to that, living in a place that only intensified my anxiety made things even harder. She left for that remote location in October and didn't return until February. The first hint that she had cheated came right after she got back. The very first time we were intimate again, she started suggesting things that were completely unexpected, way outside what we normally did. Now, our intimate life was far from plain vanilla, so these new requests caught me off guard and made me suspicious about what she might have been up to while she was away. That same night, I sat her down and directly asked if she had been unfaithful. Her out-of-the-blue suggestions just didn't sit right with me. She insisted she hadn't cheated. She explained that while she was away, she'd been following some guy online who gave tips on how to spice things up in the bedroom, and she was interested in trying them out. I believed her, I loved and trusted her deeply, and she even showed me the online guy she was talking about. At the time, it all seemed to make sense, and, in my blind love, I chose to trust her. Fast forward to April of this year. Over the past 2 years, I found ways to cope with the anxiety that living in this city caused me, and I thought our marriage was on the mend. We weren't arguing much anymore, and while our intimate life wasn't as frequent as I would have liked, it was still happening often enough. I truly felt like we'd moved past the rough patches and were in a better place. My best friend from high school, let's call him Dave, 26, was getting married to his longtime partner back in my hometown in the Midwest. So, we took a trip out there for the wedding and to see my family. At the wedding, my wife met a guy, Frank, 28, who was a good friend of Dave's from college. Since they shared similar interests in music, they quickly struck up a conversation. It was a small rural wedding, so it wasn't hard to notice her chatting with Frank. I went over, introduced myself as her husband, and he seemed like a decent guy. They continued to chat off and on throughout the reception, especially when new music played. After the reception, we left, and I drove us to our hotel a couple of hours away, as we were flying out the next morning. About a week after we got back home, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and I happened to see a Snapchat notification from Frank on my wife's phone. That struck me as odd, but when I asked about it, she just said they were friends. Once again, I chose to believe her because I loved and trusted her. Mother's Day morning arrived, and it felt like any other day. No recent issues or arguments between us. We were even intimate that morning. Later, she went out to have lunch with her family since her grandma and dad lived relatively close by. I wasn't invited to join, which felt a little strange. But considering my rocky relationship with her father, I figured maybe he didn't want me there, or perhaps she just wanted to have a lunch with her family without me. When she got back home from that lunch, she told me we needed to talk, and then hit me with, "I want a divorce. I'm not happy." My whole world came crashing down in that instant. I spent the next 20 or 30 minutes trying to persuade her to consider marriage counseling, or at least a trial separation, but nothing seemed to be working. Finally, I said, "We can fix this unless you've cheated." Cheating was always a line I couldn't cross. Once trust is broken, it's shattered for good in my eyes. No coming back from that. At that moment, she broke down completely, crying hysterically right in front of me, and that's when I knew. I knew she had cheated, but now I just needed to find out how bad it really was. As it turns out, My suspicions about the new things she wanted to try after her remote trip were right. But it wasn't just that. Over the past 2 years, she had been intimate with several other people. That revelation floored me. I was the one supporting us financially, while she, as a graduate student, had next to no income. What really stung was realizing she'd made up her mind about ending our marriage the moment she got back from that trip. Instead of being honest and getting a divorce then, she stuck around for another 2 years just to enjoy a more comfortable life and drive a nicer car. The lease was in my name, so I asked her to pack a bag and leave. I got in my car, drove to a parking lot not too far from the house, and then everything hit me all at once. I don't think I've ever cried like that in my entire life. Right in the middle of my breakdown, my brother called, reminding me to wish my mom a happy Mother's Day. As soon as he heard me sobbing, he hung up and immediately called our dad. My dad called me next, and I tried to explain everything that had happened, but saying it out loud just made it hurt even more. Eventually, I pulled myself together and went back home. My wife had packed her things and left, just like I asked her to. 2 weeks passed. I spoke with my boss and arranged for some time off. I decided to go back to the Midwest to be with my family for a few weeks, to try and figure out who I was now without her. During this time, I found out that she and Frank had been sleeping together. Not only that, but within a week of our split, she had flown back to the Midwest, where Frank was from, and had been with him ever since, flaunting their relationship all over social media. I loved her so deeply that this revelation cut me to the core. And that brings us to where I am today. I'm doing a lot better now than I was before. I still have days where the pain feels so intense it's hard to breathe. But most days, I'm managing okay. We agreed on an amicable divorce. I left her the car and the money we had in our bank account, as long as she didn't go after my retirement savings. I've basically started over financially, and while it's been a long road, I'm finally finding my footing again. Thankfully, we didn't have any kids. We were waiting for her to finish grad school, and I'm truly grateful for that now. The divorce isn't final yet. We're just waiting on the courts to wrap things up. I accepted a new job back in the Midwest, in a city about 2.5 hours away from my family, to get a fresh start. I've spent the last 3.5 years in this rough city, dealing with the worst period of my life, between battling anxiety and going through this divorce. I know I wasn't always the perfect husband, but I never stopped trying to improve myself for her. I never lied, cheated, or was violent in the 8.5 years we were together. The reason I'm writing this is that I hoped it would help me find some closure with everything that's happened, and to ask if anyone else has been through something similar. How did you learn to trust again? My biggest dream in life is to be a dad. It's something I've always wanted. But every time I try to connect with someone new, all I can think about is, how is this woman going to hurt me? I've been in therapy since the divorce started, and it's helped with a lot of things, except this. If there are any details I might have skipped over, I'll do my best to fill in the gaps.